So hello.
Oh,
First off, I wanted to thank you for coming on and taking the time to chat with me. And I'm excited to learn about you, your career, and puppet theater.
yeah.
So I wanted to start off by getting a better understanding of what it is that you do. So, coming from you, can you describe what puppet theater is and what your job entails as a full-time puppeteer?
Yeah. I sort of came at it sideways. I came at it from a theater background. I
Mhm.
did theater in Sault Ste. Marie while I was growing up. And then I went to school for it and worked in theme parks for a while. And then I learned a little bit about puppetry then, but then I got cast in a puppetry show when I moved to Toronto. And that sort of got the whole thing rolling. It's like the oldest art form in the world. It's
Yeah.
so there's a million uh different styles of puppetry theater. For me, and the way I like to use it, at least in the things that I make, I like to think of it as sort of a tool in the theatrical toolbox. I don't set out to make like puppet shows. Like I don't, hide myself and do the sort of Punch and Judy thing that people kind of picture when I say what I do. I think um, I like to find projects where puppetry can be a useful tool in telling the story. So sometimes that means we're telling a story about animals, and so puppets can be great as animals. My first show was a series of sort of 12 monologues, 12 different characters, and I used like a briefcase full of noses and eyeballs to make the 12 different characters on the same puppet. That's the kind of thing you can't really do with a person, right?
Right.
So it's specific to puppetry. Why puppetry in this instance? So that's kind of how I think about it. What my life consists of, it's a mixed bag. It's all over the place. It's I'd say 70 to 80% of what I do these days is make my own stuff and tour it. So I have a kid show. I have a few kid shows, a few adult shows. Mostly I'm touring one kid show, one adult show right now. And so, the last sort of year and a half has been a lot of creation time for these shows, coming out of the pandemic and sort of backlog projects. So that's why it's been like boom, 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 project after
Yeah.
project. And so there's the creation time, then there's the touring. For example, I did like an Ontario Presents tour, which took me all around Northern Ontario, ending in Sault Ste. Marie, which was very fun to be back at White Pines, which I sort of consider my home theater.
Yeah.
So fun. So that's like 70 to 80% of what I do. I also do I make custom puppets, like bespoke commissions for TV, for ad agencies, for publishers, whatever, right? Whoever thinks they might need a puppet. So I do that kind of stuff. I do commercials and TV. I'm on a show called The Fabulous Show with Faye and Fluffy, which everyone should check out. That's on Family Junior, and it just won a Canadian Screen Award, which is very exciting. So there's that kind of stuff as well. And then then there's that like little thing that I tell almost no one about, which is like I have an Etsy store where I sell my puppet patterns. It's
I
just like
love
it's just all over the place. But the best thing about the Etsy store, and like I encourage any young artist, if their medium encourages it, and like my medium doesn't really allow for an Etsy store, but I sell the patterns, right? So it's
Right.
digital. I don't have to mail anything. The nice thing about it is when you're working in the arts, I just get a couple emails a day being like, you just made $10, and it's like, oh, that's nice. I didn't even do anything. Unlike the rest of the time where I'm running around doing
Right.
skits with face shoved down my pants and stuff. It's like, no, this is good. It's passive income. So
Yes.
that's sort of how I spend my days.
Perfect. That was great. We're gonna dive deeper into a little bit of all of those. So you kind of touched on it. What is a common misconception of puppetry and what you do that listeners should clear their head from as we go deeper into like your world?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a misconception, but there's a thing that people think about when they think of puppets, which is sort of Sesame Street and the Muppets, right?
Right.
And that's not a bad thing, because that is some great and uh, sort of, I don't want to say revolutionary puppetry. That's not correct, but like it was important in bringing puppetry back to pop culture where it started, right?
Right.
And so people think of that. And sort of, I think you have to kind of work when you're working in puppetry that's not that. You have to kind of work to explain anytime you're doing anything that's not that, right?
Yeah.
And I imagine that's the same with a lot of art forms. And I know, with my work as an actor, there's a lot of like, oh, I'm in a movie. Oh, great, what movie are you in? And it's like, well, you don't know it because it doesn't exist yet, right? There's a
Right.
lot of dynamic that happens no matter where you work in entertainment, and probably in other fields too. But that's definitely a sort of misconception. And it's funny when I'm teaching people puppetry, another thing is like they put it on, the first thing people do is like
Yeah.
waggle at or kiss, and it's like, great, get it out of your system. That's awesome. I'm glad you're having fun, but like the amount of like specificity that when I look around at my peers who are wonderful puppeteers, there's none of that. It's like we're talking like minuscule movements with
Wow.
that style of puppetry, and that's what makes it alive. And so it's if one is interested, and you can kind of look at the puppet and sort of see through it and see what the hand is doing. It's kind of interesting how actually small the
Right.
movement.
Yeah, that's so cool. Did you ever imagine this would be your full-time job? Um, and what did your younger self imagine your career to look like?
Well, I mean, to imagine it's one's full-time job is lunacy, right?
Yeah.
The fact that I get to do it, I feel very lucky. I think I always thought I would work in the arts, and in theater specifically. Like I said, I grew up doing theater. It's just kind of what I've always done. And then when I went to school, though, I mean, there have been a number of times in my life. Like when I started high school, I was like, that's it. I'm not doing any more community theater. I have to focus on school.
Hmm.
And then that lasted a week and a half, right?
Yeah.
And so that didn't happen. Then when I went to university, I was like, my major was arts and business and theater, so I was going to stay in theater, but the idea was I wouldn't do performance. I would do sort of like theater administration.
Okay.
Again, that lasted a week and a half, and then I was in a show and I was getting credits for shows, and then I all these times where I kept trying to escape, it kept pulling me back, and I often describe it as more like a calling than a career choice. It's sort
Yeah.
of like priesthood that way. It's not a great idea, but sometimes somehow you end up in it. And so I think as a kid, I thought, maybe something along these lines, or maybe, arts administration or something like this. And so it's
Yeah.
fun. It's what I do is all those things.
Yes.
I guess I didn't think I'd be doing all the jobs at once, but here we are.
No, that's incredible. I love that. So, what specifically did you engage in the Sioux when you were living in the Sioux? What outlets did you participate in?
Yeah, so my dad is a drummer, and I think he's actually in a photo in the museum up in that music room.
Yeah.
I like to rip him about because, I mean, you're old when you're in a museum. Um, he's a wonderful drummer, and he used to play in pit bands for like orchestras and musicals. And
Wow.
so um, when my younger brother was born, he's about 3 years younger. My mom said, you could keep playing in the pit bands, but you're gonna have to figure out something with Adam. And so he just took me to rehearsals. So one of my earliest memories is being in the orchestra area, which was backstage for Evita,
Wow.
which was Sioux Opera Society, I think, when that used to exist, sitting on his shoulders uh while he played Evita, which is long and difficult. So like good on him. And so that sort of got me started. And I would have been like 3 at that time. I did my first show when I was 6. I think that was also Sioux Opera Society. That was Fiddler on the Roof. A wonderful woman named Sue Barber directed that. And she ended up being quite a mentor in many areas of my artistic life as I grew up. Also did work with Sioux Theater Workshop, a lot with Musical Comedy Guild, which is where I directed my first show when I was about 21 or something like that. We did Rent. And theater SMC. I went to school there. I didn't do so many shows there when I was at school there, but when I was a kid before I went to school there, I did shows. So just, like all over the place. I started my own sort of theater camp for a while.
Oh,
Yeah, I really, often people, if I do a Q&A after shows, often if I'm doing shows, it's in more rural areas. If I'm doing a Q&A, they tend to like that thing and the sort of thing. And so people will say, do you like that you grew up in a smaller city
mm,
center? And I always say, yes, I think if I grew up in, Etobicoke, I'd probably be an accountant or something.
right.
And not that there's anything wrong with that, but as far as becoming an artist, I think the fact that I was a boy in Sault Ste. Marie who was willing to be in the arts, I got a lot more mentorship and opportunity than I was really deserving of, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, that's so great. So what was you went to the University of Waterloo, right?
I did.
Yes, I also went there.
What
Um,
for?
Global Business and Digital Arts.
Oh, there you go.
Uh-huh.
They really do a good job of having fun sounding programs,
Oh
don't
yeah.
they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at the program I think that you were in, mixing the business with an arts, but I stuck with the new program, GBA. So I want to know what was your focus during your time there? You kind of touched on it, both admin and theater, but what was your main focus in terms of theater, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, the intention was theater administration, right? The reason I
Yeah.
went to Waterloo, there were two programs like that at the time. I don't know if they both still exist, but there was one in Ottawa and one in Waterloo, and I went and I worked at Disney for a year after. Still, I worked at Disney for a year after high school, and the Waterloo is the one that let me defer, and Ottawa was going to make me reapply. So I said, I guess I'm going to the University of Waterloo.
Yeah.
That was the full decision, really. And but I knew I wanted a business degree, and I knew I wanted to specialize in arts. And the great thing about the arts and business program is you get to choose your major. So your art can be economics, right? It can be English, it can be whatever. So mine was theater. I think there were two of us that did that weird combination. And so, overall, it was an interesting experience that prepared me quite well, because in the business classes, I was always the creative person. I was always the hippie in the business classes.
Yeah.
And then in classes, I was always the sort of more conservative, fiscally conservative sounding business person. It was very, commercial. And so I was constantly at odds in a friendly way, but constantly at odds. Like I said, I didn't plan on doing theater, like theater performance while I was there. But they did Rocky Horror Show in my first semester, and I auditioned and I got a part. The next thing you know, I was doing that, and it ran the gamut. Like it's a liberal arts program. It's
Right.
not conservatory style, so it's kind of piecemeal. So you really do get to sort of choose your own adventure. Um, and So yeah, I mean, I did Rocky Horror Show, I did Tartuffe, I did what else was I did Bent, which is sort of a piece about like queer people in Nazi Germany. I did yeah, I did some projection design. Is that true? Does that sound like me? And it was a long time ago. Yeah, but it was kind of all over the place. And the teachers the professors and the instructors were great. Like I was a research assistant for someone whose specialty was like Victorian English theater, and then the guy who's I think the dean of the program now is like site specific theater. So it was
Mm,
really broad,
yeah.
really. And the head of the program then, his specialty was sort of this sounds obvious now, but at the time it was quite cutting edge, but using internet to make theater. Little did he
Right.
know it's like 15 years ahead of when everybody would need to do that. So I remember them doing a show where it was like, I feel like it was like Florida, Chicago, and Waterloo, and they all performed the show to
Wow.
get
Yeah.
internet. So, anyways, really broad is the point.
Yeah, super cool. So let's go back to Disney then. What was your job at Disney, and what was like your day-to-day life like living in Florida?
Yeah, well, and yeah, I'm glad you bring it up because I think if there are any people in high school, I think this is a cool thing that people should know is an option for them.
Yeah.
Uh, so the first thing I did there was called the Cultural Representative Program, and it's a special kind of visa that really only Disney uses. They petitioned the government for this special visa called a Q1 visa, and that is a cultural rep visa. You get to go and represent your country in a place. So for most of the countries, that's Epcot. You know, if you're from France, you work in France. If you're like me and you're from Canada, you work in Canada. Some of the people who come from the African continent will work in Animal Kingdom and stuff like that, and some of the resorts. But mostly it is in Epcot, and that's where I worked. And you can work in attractions, which is like the movie thing. You can work in merchandise where you're selling people stuff, and you can work in food and beverage, which consists of sort of outdoor food carts in
Okay.
the indoor restaurant, steakhouse. And so these aren't like, you know, the fanciest jobs in the world, right? Like let's make no mistake, but it so I turned 18 and moved like less than a month later, right? I turned 18, graduated high school, packed up and moved. And I mean, it was just such a formative experience, right? And I met so many people, many of whom are dear friends to this day. And like, and they're cool people too, right? Like they're people who work just like in all kinds of interesting pockets of the world. And when I tour across Canada too, because we all work together because we were the Canadian ones, but people are from everywhere from PEI to Vancouver Island. So when I tour across, I get to see people, which is super cool. So for the meeting the people, for the experience, I mean, it's also such a good conversation point on a resume.
Definitely.
Yeah, yeah, people find it interesting. It's also like if ever in your life you're going to work in a corporate atmosphere, it doesn't get that much more corporate than Disney, right? So like it really trained me as an 18-year-old to like understand how to operate in
Yeah.
that strict framework. And you know, honestly, I spent a lot of my time as a server because I was out in the popcorn cart and I found that quite warm outside in the middle of summer at a popcorn cart. And I learned that like you can move up to become a server and then you make tips. And, you know, greedy little 18-year-old brain was like, well, how do I do that? And they said, you have to spiel the menu, like learn it. And then a manager will ask you questions about it and you'll answer. And I said, well, I could memorize. That's what I do. So I
Yep.
took the menu home and I came back the next day and I said, I'm ready to do that thing. And I did it. And I became a server right away. So the point is I paid for much of my university with that
Yeah.
time. I don't know the economics of it now. That may not be the case anymore, how that works, but like at the time that was that. And while I was there, I got to do some job shadows with entertainment through a whole bunch of begging. And so that was super cool. And I used those connections to go back as a sort of um, start as a co-op placement at Waterloo. Then I dropped the co-op. So it was just a summer job at that point. But then I got to go back and do entertainment, which is like doing the characters in the parks and the costumes. And that, yeah, super duper fun. I mean, yeah, I always say it was simultaneously the best and the worst thing at the same time. Like
I can imagine. Yeah.
it was so magical and wonderful. And then also you're like, I think I have 3 minutes before I die. So I did that, and then not Disney, but I went back with another company and worked at Kennedy Space Center doing a Star Trek show there for the better part of a year. And there I was sort of a show manager, and that was a little bit different. A little, you know, you asked about the day to day. So the day to day at Disney is all over the place. They schedule you willy nilly. Most of your time is spent on a bus getting from the parking lot to wherever you're working that day.
Right.
It's that, but you know, pretty special. You know, at Kennedy Space Center, we did 3 to 5 shows a day on average. So you know, we'd get there, we'd prep. There was, you know, a Vulcan eyebrows and ears involved, so there was an hour of makeup or something, and then we would do our shows, and then at the end of the day, and we do our meet and greets too. And at the end of the day, as show manager, I would do show reports, send them off, and then and then that was it. Sometimes
Hmm.
we'd do something fun. Sometimes we'd sleep because it's hard, you know. It's you gotta stay at the top of your physical game when you're doing stuff like that.
Definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So cool. So what was next after Disney and university? What was next?
Yeah. So I did my first Disney. I did university with a second Disney in there, and then I finished university while I was doing Star Trek. I did my sort of last few courses by distance while I was doing that,
Okay.
which I can't believe they let me do that. And then I did a semester at NYU in vocal performance, and
Wow.
the intention was to go there to fit. That was like a master's level thing, and the intention was to go there to finish that. And then I decided, no, I'm going to move to Toronto instead. And so I moved to Toronto and started auditioning and doing commercials and theater and stuff. And that is where I got cast in Avenue Q, which is a puppet musical, and that's where I met Mike Peterson, who is a wonderful puppeteer and is working with me on FERRY TALE actually.
Oh, nice.
And he taught me puppetry, and he's a wonderful puppeteer, wonderful teacher. He was in the original Fraggle Rock. Right now he is Brandon the Bear in the Miss Persona show, which is also, I believe it's on Treehouse. Yeah, so he's great, and that really helped me. Meeting him and meeting other people like him sort of pushed me firmly down that path.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not been linear. There was a lot of non-puppet musical theater in there. I worked at a theater in southwestern Ontario called Victoria Playhouse Petrolia for 4-ish years as assistant artistic director. The pandemic happened in there as well.
Yeah.
There's been all that, and yeah, quite like you said. Did you ever plan on this? It's like, oh God, like no. Can you imagine? Like it's just been such a wild journey all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, so cool. So I imagine you participate in a lot of residencies as well. Um, so what does a typical residency look like for you? I know you just participated in one in Toronto, I believe, at the Tarragon Theater. Yeah.
Yeah. I've
And
done this 3, I think. One, yeah, I'm not sure I'll be able to typify anything,
yeah.
but so the first one I did was in Australia, and that was kind of self-led. That was with a company called the Puppet Smithery, and Jess Knight, who worked on the Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio recently. We just went to see the exhibit together at MoMA in New York, which was very fun to see with her. But she sort of mentored me, and that's where I developed my crow puppet for my show, The Family Crow, actually with her there. Um, and that was sort of self-led. Like I got an Ontario Arts Council grant, and it was actually not to go there, it was to go somewhere in New York. But by the time the grants take time to come through, by the time it came through, that company had closed. So I was like, "Ugh," and I found somewhere else to go, and that's how I ended up in Australia, which was good. I also did a residency with my friend and peer Sarah Garchor, and we did one through Ontario Culture Days. We actually did our final presentation at the museum
Mhm.
last, and yeah, that I mean, again, that was the through line with all my residencies have been like they've just been kind of wide open. It's never been very prescriptive. Maybe some of them are, but I think any of the ones that would choose me are kind of like do whatever you want. So that was the Ontario Culture Days one. Then Tarragon Theater, yeah. So that I pitched them with a sort of a material exploration. Like I wanted to use flip sequin fabrics, like you swipe them and they change colors. And I wanted to make a piece of puppet theater using that. That was kind of the whole pitch. And I submitted it while I was touring, and I didn't have much time to put much more thought into it, which can be a great way to submit applications sometimes. I feel like if you just say this is what I want to do, it allows the readers to use their own imagination instead of trying to understand what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I submitted that, and we did, further interviews and stuff, and then they accepted, and I think there were 160 applications or something, and they only accepted 4 groups, which was, very flattering. And then when that happened, it's like, oh, I guess I need to make something now. So that's where the kids show that I've been touring came from. Emilio's A Million Chameleons, and the puppets sort of swipe, and the chameleons swipe and become different colors, and there's other kind of fun reveals with the fabric. And so that was that residency. And there, they were super helpful with if we had technical questions, right? We had the technical staff would be able to help us. They would allow us rehearsal space. They would offer us sort of dramaturgical, aka like writing assistance or discussion if we wanted it. So it was, really, really welcoming. They're actually accepting applications right now until May 15th for the next round. So people should apply because it's a pretty cool residency.
Yeah, so it's cool. I saw with this one when I was doing research on you, I saw you made a post about that you had 500 plushy sequence chameleons just at
Well,
your.
a few hundred.
Can you tell us the story and what are you doing with all these chameleons?
Well, we're continuing to do the show, so we'll sell them eventually, right?
Right.
I've wanted plushies for my shows for years. The problem is, so the place generally that you get plushies made is generally from China or somewhere over there, right? So there's often a language barrier when you're discussing, and they're working within the limitations of what their machines and their people and their designers can do, right? So when I was doing my Spencer Stays Inside web series, I tried to get some plushies made, and the fresh hell of the pictures that came back, it was like they just never happened, because it was like it was demonic. And I couldn't. Yeah. But then with the chameleons, I was like, because often the problem is that the eyes are all wonky, and I was like, it's great. Chameleons have wonky eyes.
Yeah.
So they so I was like, okay, we'll get them done. So I found this one company. They were right on it. They made it. It looked great. Like, I sent it to my director. He's like, did you make that? I was like, no, this is okay. This is good. This is the company. And then I ordered them, which is a bit of a thing, and it's 500 minimum quantity, but we were about to do 17 cities or something like that. So it's like, great. But then I needed them in time for the 17 cities. So then, you can get them by ship, which takes months, or you can get them by air, which takes a week. So I was like, okay, well, we'll pay like so much more to get them by air, like more than the cost of the plushies to get them by air. So we'll have them in time. Well, one thing after another, and they arrived 4 days after the tour ended. So the tour ends 4 days later, I come back and there's 6 boxes filled with 500 plush dolls on my doorstep. And I was like, well, all right. So I've been selling them to people who do want them, which is not as easy as having them in a basket after the show. They will be for sale for the benefit of Fringe North at FERRY TALE in the Sault, and they will be at every performance of Emilio's A Million Chameleons that I ever do, which apparently now I'm doing till I'm 90 because I have these plushies to get rid of. So,
so good.
they're in a storage. They're not in my apartment or my bathtub or anything. They are in a storage.
I love it. They probably take up so much room.
Luckily, if they're in the boxes,
Right.
you're fine. Like, so, I have not taken a look at any of the other boxes, because as soon as you open them, you can't put that genie back in the bottle, right? It's just like,
so good. So what's touring like? Rehearsal prep, how big is your crew? How do you get place to place? All that kind of stuff. What is it like?
yeah, it depends on the show. For the Crow show, for Family Crow, I can do it myself, usually with a venue technician, and they can follow along the script to varying degrees of success. In an ideal world, I travel with my director, Byron, who sort of behaves like a stage manager on the road for that show. And then he definitely comes with me with Emilio's Emilian Chameleons, because it's more complicated. There's a confetti cannon, there's an inflatable set, there's some complicated music tracks to follow along, which he's perfected. So it's usually the two of us. And it depends. You're flying, you're renting cars, you're driving. We had to rent a U-Haul because our flight to the Soo got canceled from Thunder Bay. So we rented a 15-foot U-Haul and drove 11 or 12 hours from Dryden to the Soo, which was great. So I mean, it's all over the place, but it's pretty cool, and you get a sense of sort of different audiences.
Yeah.
And it's the chances that I'm just going to go to Winnipeg for fun are lower. Nothing against Winnipeg. The chances I'm going to go anywhere for fun are lower. But like for touring, it's like, great, I get to go spend 2 weeks in Winnipeg this summer and see it, and I hear it's a cool city, and that's great. So get to go enjoy that. So honestly, that's why I started writing shows, because I was like, I want to go to all these places, but I need an excuse to do it as a poor artist at the time. So I was like, what if I write shows? Then I can bring it to festivals and go. So that worked, I guess.
That is so great. Oh, awesome. So not only do you do theater shows, but you also appear in a lot of TV shows and movies and that kind of stuff. So how does live shows compare to film productions?
Yeah, I mean, live shows, I call it gay aerobics, right? Like it's like you get shot out of the cannon for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you're a sopping mess at the end. And that's there's a lot more of the sort of energy exchange, right? The audience is sending you energy, you're sending them energy. So that's what I know, and that's what I love. And then there's the film and TV, which is the opposite, right? You have to manufacture your energy because you've just been sitting for 6 hours in a trailer, or in my case, under a table with your hand through a hole or something like that, right? And then you come out from the table and no one knows who you are. They're like, who's that guy? You're manufacturing your energy, and also there's no feedback. The crew has to obviously remain quiet, so it's very much like furnace is on, windows are open. You're like putting out all that energy, but it's not coming back. So it's very different. From an artistic standpoint, it's interesting. Like on the Fabulous show, we have monitors, so we can watch what we're doing, and we can monitor our performances and perfect them, and sort of tweak them. Whereas on stage, you're kind of using muscle memory and your best judgment. So there are benefits to both. I will say the sort of return on energy for TV and film and commercials is much higher than theater. You're not rumbling around in a U-Haul for hours on. You go for a couple hours, you wiggle the dolly, and you go home. So I'm glad both exist in my life. I think it balances nicely.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about your character on the Fabulous show with Faye and Fluffy. So you play Fuzz, a non-binary hamster, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
So did you have a hand in developing that character?
So the character design was done by my friend Kanya Chen, and he designed them and he built the puppet. I did, as far as I can recall, anyways, I came up with the voice, which is sort of a variation of a voice I've done for other things. What is Fuzz? He's so teeny, right? So he's like got this really compressed sound, and he's a little bit more of a rules follower, so he's a little bit uptight. And then my friend Christy plays Moogie the troll, and she's a little more all over the place. Moogie is he, Christy is she. And then we have Pepito the worm, and we share that character. He's non-verbal Pepito, so we take turns playing Pepito, and they were all designed by Kanya.
Cool. So have you seen from the show, have you seen an impact on the show and your character? How is the impact of your character? Have you seen an impact on your character?
Yeah, it well, so it's on like at the on Fuzz.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's been, I don't know, it's been lovely seeing this show reach the people it needs to reach, right? The people it's meant to reach. It's drag queen story time, which was at the time I was like, ooh, that's exciting that that's going to be on network TV, and then and now it's like, oh, I didn't know we were being so political. And so I'm glad that it's out there. And there's something wonderful about puppets where, I mean, how can you be mad about Fuzz the hamster who uses they them pronouns? Is like, what is Fuzz the hamster, right? There's something disarming about it. So no matter how much people can be unjustifiably angry at people who use they them pronouns or drag queens or trans people, Fuzz is Fuzz. And so I love that. And I like how kids accept
Yeah.
accept that way. That this is no problem, right? There's no question. You tell them this is Fuzz and they do this and the kids get it right away. It's the adults who kind of have to, oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So you physically create puppets too, like sourcing fabrics, getting the eyes, gluing and sewing them together. So how many puppets have you made this far?
That's a great question. I mean, probably in the 50 to 100 range.
Wow.
I mean, they range, right? Some of them are complex. Some
Yeah.
of them are 14 feet tall. Some of them are like highly detailed, and some of them are like, I'm looking at one on my shelf, and it's like a carrot, and they run the gamut. And then like with Fairy Tale, it's like these are two-dimensional. Like
Right.
it is a show with puppet, or it is a puppetry show, but there aren't really any puppets in the traditional sense. They're like two-dimensional paper pieces
Right.
uh, that are being used as puppets. But yeah, it's many. Most, I'd say, like 50% for myself and 50% for other people at this point.
Right. Yeah. So when you do a commission-based one, what do you get? Like, what information do you receive, and how much freedom do you have when creating?
Yeah, good question. I so depends. One of my favorite people to work with is Newfoundland Now and Rogers TV in St. John's. They use puppets to make their show, and I built a few of their puppets for them. And usually, Jake will come to me and say, "I want a sack puppet," or "I wanted this puppet." Like he has an idea of the style of puppet he wants, and I ask him if he has any other needs, and he doesn't. And so it's like, great. So then I get to make something completely out of nothing, which is super fun.
Yes.
And then sometimes you go through the process of like, there's a lot of sketching, there's a lot of, um, back and forth and approvals and stuff like that. And then you're showing every step of the way. And that can work too, right? It
Yeah.
depends how specific the designs have to get.
Yeah. Do you prefer the more open project?
Well, it's definitely less onerous, right?
Yeah.
But I understand the need for the other, but it's definitely more fun to just be able to look at the stuff on the ground and be like, all right, what am I going to do with this?
Yeah, so cool. How did you learn the art of making puppets?
Yeah, I'm mostly self-taught in that regard. Um, with my first show, which was called Baker's Dozen, I knew I needed kind of a complicated puppet, in that it had to be blank and then everything had to sort of stick on it. And like, I didn't quite know how I wanted it to work. And I knew I certainly couldn't afford to pay someone at the time to make it for me. I've always been pretty good at figuring stuff out. So I was like, okay. And a friend of mine who's a one of my favorite puppet builders on the planet, his name's Andy Hayward. He's great. He's in the new Fraggle Rock, and he built the puppets for the Avenue Q I did, but he offered me a pattern. He said, you can use this basic pattern that I have if you want, and that, without much alteration, I think became the puppet for Baker's Dozen. And then I taught myself going from there. And it's funny, when I went back to rebuild Baker's Dozen, I I had gotten better, so I kind of fixed some of the mistakes I made, and then it was like, oh, that's wrong. Like that, none of the characters looked right anymore. So I had to make it worse again just for that show, and then and then you get better overall. But yeah, it's just a process of sort of figuring things out. If anybody's interested, there's a wonderful guy on the internet, also named Adam. His name's Adam Krutinger. His channel is now called Puppet Nerd, I believe, and he is. I mean, when there are people who are just like born educators, like he was a teacher, and he is such a good teacher in this sense. Like he's so generous with his knowledge and with his skills, and so definitely encourage everyone, even if you're just interested in sort of how it works, and scrub through his videos. He's great. He uses the overhead cameras and stuff, like, so it's very satisfying to watch.
Where does inspiration come from when creating your own characters and stories?
Yeah, all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, I don't know, it's funny when something sort of tickles your fancy, right? When it's like, depending what it is, like with Baker's Dozen, the idea was the title, right? Where I was like, oh, well, there could be 12 puppets, and then I'm because I'll be on stage, I'll be the 13th. And so then what's 12? Well, that's the jury, right? And so that was kind of, and then in the jury, I was in Chicago in the Sioux, and the jury is played by one person. So I was like, oh, okay. So that sort of train of thought with the Crow show. I mean, a family of crow, or a group of crows, is called a murder. So I thought a murder mystery would be fun. So again, with the wordplay, there's a lot of wordplay involved in this answer, probably. And so and I just wrote that on a whim. I never thought it was, viable as a show. Little did I know. And then Emilio's A Million Chameleons, I was thinking, because chameleons change colors, and we had to do it with the flip sequin. I was thinking, okay, well, maybe chameleons. And then I tried to write a song called A Million Chameleons, and it was kind of crappy. And I was explaining this with my wonderful director, Byron LaViolette, and I was like, I tried to write this song. And then we were in the car back from the Sioux, actually. And I was like, well, it'd be funny if it was called Emilio's A Million Chameleons. And then we both started laughing, and then we came up with the song right on the spot. And I was like, all right, that's it. We're good. And then with something like Fairy Tale, like, that story was introduced to me by my father, because I was researching something completely different, and different but related. So he sent me that story, and that's where that came from.
Cool. So it was the story first that gave you the inspiration for Fairy Tale?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was this great article. The Sault Ste. Marie Public Library does a series called Remember When. I believe they publish it on Sault Today, and it's usually just like a little something drawn from the archives, and they tie it together in a nice little succinct story. And so that's where this story came from. And as soon as I read it, I was like, well, this is absolutely useless for what I'm working on right now, but that would be a cool thing in and of itself. Just the visual storytelling of, two people kept apart and then trying to be together, and then taking the ferry back and forth. I was able to sort of picture a version of it right away.
Yeah. Can you share that story, or the story of the production that you're doing?
Yes, so the plot itself, the true story is, it took place in the Sioux in 1933. There's a couple. You have Mary, who is Canadian, and you have John, who is American, and they met, they fell in love, they were married, they lived together. Then there came a time where they couldn't be in each other's countries anymore. So Mary couldn't go to the States, John couldn't go to Canada. And so then they were stuck in their opposite countries on opposite sides of the St. Mary's River, which, the St. Mary's River, which is not far from where you're sitting right now, is not very wide. It's like right there. You could see people, right? Like it feels like such a silly, arbitrary thing, but it is very real for these people. They couldn't be together. But there was no bridge at the time. The way people got across until the 60s was by ferry. So they realized that what they could do is get on the ferry, and ride it back and forth all night long together, and then go to their separate countries at the end of the night. So it's kind of this neutral zone that they were allowed to be in before they hit either customs office. So they did that for weeks and months, until the water froze over, and then they couldn't be together anymore. And that's sort of where in our story, that's where we start the choose your own adventure ending, because that's more fun. But yeah, so that was the story of them. But their tale got a lot of attention. It went all the way to the Supreme Court in the States. Paramount and Universal both sent film crews to film them, thinking they might make a movie about it. It was reported, there are reports as far down as Texas, news reports.
Wow.
Like it gained a lot of attention. And it's funny because I had never heard of it. I think most people had never heard of it. So I think it's fun, and I think it's particularly relevant right now because we've just spent 3 years like not being together, right? And there, people. I know a few people in the Sioux who have partners in the States, and that was a rough time, right? Like, so I think it's particularly relevant right now, and super cool to do it in the museum because it's the old federal building. It used to be the customs office. It's where much of this story would have taken place, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So what is your role in this production?
I would say creator, performer, and also the producer, as is often the case. And so I'll be performing the show. Now, the style of the show is different than people are used to seeing me doing. It's, like I said, it's paper puppets. So we're using like a top-down camera, and all the show will happen down here, and I'll be moving, newspapers, documents, the little animated characters, cutouts, photos, things like that to tell the story. And it'll be projected behind me, really big so everyone can see. Cool. And so I'll be doing that performing. I've been creative directing, in that I'm not building everything for the show, which is a nice new change for me. I'm building some of the stuff, but then I have my friend Christy, who I mentioned was Moogie in the Fabulous show, is doing some puppet mechanisms for me. I have a wonderful animator named Chris Ross in Vancouver who's doing the character design, someone named Emily Dewar who's out in Halifax doing graphic design for some of the, we have a lot of the actual documents, right, but we need some blanks, so she's filling in some of the blanks. Cool. And then my friend Rob in Montreal, Rob Denton, wonderful sound designer and composer, is coming up with the music to underscore the whole thing. So it's been kind of fun to surround myself with people I like and be like, yes, more of that, no, less of that, and it's great, and it's sort of coming together. Although I must say it feels weird to not be surrounded in police right now this close to a show. It's a very different experience.
Yeah, I forgot to ask, where do you put all your puppets, and where do you and all
I have a storage unit, Petrolia, which is where I used to work, and that has my older shows in it, like Baker's Dozen and Adam's Unplugged Puppet Party and various sundry puppets. And then I have a storage unit here in Toronto, which has Emilio's A Million Chameleons, and then the literal 500 chameleons, and the Crow Show in it. And then with building stuff, it's kind of tucked away in corners and things here. I'm doing my best to weed through it, but it's entering like hoarder level. It's hard. It's specific things, right? And yes, it's foams and fleeces, and it's even hard to throw away like a little scrap, because it's like, ooh, a nice tuft of orange hair. Someday that tuft of orange hair can solve a lot of problems for you.
Definitely.
So I don't know what to do about that. I think it's about time for a studio of some sorts, but
that's cool.
Just not here enough is the problem, right?
Right, touring and all that. Yeah, so cool. So back to Fairy Tale. I just want all our listeners to know what all the details they need to know.
Yeah.
Where it is, when, how to get tickets, all that.
Okay, so fairytaleshow.com will take anybody to the ticket site. It is on May 12th and 13th. It's a whole thing. So the show's mini. It's only like half an hour long or less. But the doors open at 7. There'll be live music and snacks and a bar and things to look at and things to buy. And then the show will happen at 8, and it'll be, like I said, nice and mini. You'll get to enjoy your show, and then you get to go and enjoy the rest of your night. So that happens twice on 2 times, on the 12th and then on the 13th. And we're taping. It's a live taping, so there'll be cameras there because we are the puppet show will exist in the museum afterwards as part of an exhibition, which is super cool. And then with the taping of the whole thing, we're going to do stuff with that too, and more info to come on that. And what's important about that is, it's a great opportunity for people to come and hang out at the museum, which is super cool. And it is a fundraiser for Fringe North, which is an organization I care about very much. I sit on the board. And they're doing their festival again in August, and it is important for them to fundraise. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this in partnership with them. And so I hope people will come and support Fringe and enjoy a show and snacks and music and all that at the same time.
So fun. I'm looking forward to
it. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Okay, last question. Questions, I think I have 2. What show or production sticks out to you the most in being the most rewarding for yourself and apparent to your audience?
So I've been working on the show with Byron, called How to Hug a Porcupine, since I've been working on it since like 2017, maybe even 2016. And then we did a workshop in 2018, and then we were going to do another workshop in 2020 or 2021. And obviously that didn't happen. So we did a virtual workshop, which we shot in the old St. Mary's, the old tech in the Soo. And the idea was like we would workshop what we needed to do, like sort of work out the stuff we needed to work out, and it wouldn't be in front of an audience, but whatever. And now the intention is to do it on the stage eventually. That's sort of like over the next couple of years. There's enough new shows for now, but like over the next couple of years to do that. But the digital version of this thing, which is about 35 minutes long maybe, and it accidentally became a short film, even though the idea was like it was a theatrical workshop. It became a short film, and it won like the short film awards, including at the Sioux Film Fest, which is super fun. And it's maybe my favorite thing I've ever made. It's really fun and very specifically me, right? I like the story. I love the puppets. I love how much it was an answer to the time. Like this was like peak Zoom era, right? So I was like, I didn't want to just set up some cameras and do a theater show. People were real sick of watching taped theater at that point. So I was like, we have to, if we're going to do something. So we did it as if, the puppeteer was thrown into the room to do this Zoom presentation. And so like, it started off as sort of like just him, but then there were multiple angles, which ended up like an angle on my face, and then the security camera of the room, and then the other people came. At one point, I think we had like 7 angles or something, like all playing at once. So it was this fun challenge for our director of photography, Neil Bakonjic, who is working with us on Fairy Tale, to be like, even if we're faking it, it has to look like all the cameras are running all the time, which is the opposite of how film works, right? This is like theater people trying to do film. It's like, no, we want to be able to play 7 feeds at once. And I think the result was interesting. It felt more like theater than film because you got to kind of choose where you were watching, unlike film, which directs your gaze. It was like you really could watch it 10 times and see something different every time. So I'm very, very proud of that.
Yeah, so cool. Where can our viewers watch it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think the porcupineshow.com, I think because it's in film festivals, I don't know if the full version is up there, but there's definitely like a trailer. that people can watch to kind of get an idea. And we do have plans to kind of bring it back for the stage, like I said, and hopefully the development of that will be in the suit when that happens. So
Cool. Very
yeah.
cool. So last question, what motivates you to keep going and continuing to share your love for puppet theater?
Yeah, it's like I said at the beginning, it's like it feels more like a calling than it does like a logical thing, right? Like it's the storytelling and you know, and it's a complicated time in history for about a million reasons. And so, you know, I like to think of my work as sort of Flintstone vitamins, right? It's, you know, looks fun on the outside and but ooh, might trick you into learning something.
Yeah.
So, you know, that is important. I had this teacher in New York who said, and I'll get some of this wrong, but he said there are these monks somewhere and they spin this big wheel and they've been spinning it for thousands of years. And the idea is that if the wheel stops spinning, the universe ends. And he said something that made me laugh, and I remember it all these years later. He said, "Now I don't know if I believe that, but I would prefer they continue to spin the wheel." That's kind of how I feel about about the making of theater. It's like I don't know what would happen if I stopped, but I think it's probably better we just keep doing that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. And I want to make sure everyone goes gets tickets for May 12th and 13th to go see Fairy Tale.
Yes.
And yeah, thank you for chatting with me.
Of course, this was super fun.
Yeah, thanks.
See you in a week and a half at the museum.
Yay. Yes, sounds good. I'm excited to meet you in person.
Yeah, likewise.